It's Tim Albright with AVNation, taking a look at Black History Month and the Black History contributions to the AV industry. With me today is my buddy Alexis La Broi from PRG Gear. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
So, well, thank you. And this is actually, before we get started, this was an idea that came to us from our buddy Megan Dutta from SCN. So we're doing this in collaboration with SCN and the folks at AVNetwork.com, talking about not just the contributions of the people of color within the AV industry, but also taking a look at the experiences, right? And, you know, not only the innovations that have happened, but also what it's been like to be a person of color, to be a Black person within the AV industry. Mm-hmm. So kind of first and foremost, before we get started down that road, just tell us kind of a little bit about yourself and what you do in your current position with PRG.
Mm-hmm, sure. So I am the director of sales I was the director of sales for New England and the Middle Atlantic. So DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and New England, Boston area specifically. So since COVID, it's drastically changed what everybody's job descriptions have been. And we are all doing a little bit of everything at this point. So that's my official title and my official role and responsibility at PRG Gear. And I am really happy to still be able to represent them. And I am honored to be able to represent all of our furloughed team members all around the country and all around in all the countries that we work in.
Yeah, it's especially the live events has been particularly hit in the last year or so. Absolutely.
Yes, it has been a rough year, and it's, you know, we kind of told ourselves things were going to change with the new year, and some things have, but this hasn't yet. Yeah. So we are still we're still waiting and hoping and praying that things will get better sooner rather than later. And you know, I hope these vaccinations start making a difference for our communities. Yeah,
absolutely. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about, because you and I've known you for probably about 10 years. Mm-hmm. And you talk for a second about how you got involved in the industry. And I love asking this question just in general, because for every person in the AV industry, there is a different story and a different path. So for a young Alexis, how did you get involved in the industry?
I would say it started in high school for me. I took some theater classes, technical theater, stage management, building flats, all that. And at my high school, there weren't a lot of girls who were doing that. So we had to convince our theater teacher to let us do it. And eventually we won him over, and he taught us how to use all the equipment, all the saws, how to build the flats, how, you know, the more he taught us, I think the more we were confident, and the more he was confident that, you know, he could include more girls in the classes so that we could learn the stagecraft. So that was high school. I got to Northwestern. I went to Northwestern for undergraduate, and I remember I needed a work study job, and I remember seeing signs for this company called Sound and Sight, or Sight and Sound. It's been almost 30 years, Tim. So I graduated in 91, so it has been 30 years. But I remember seeing signs for this company, and I looked into it, and it was the audiovisual company for the Student Union Center. So I worked for Sound and Sight probably the first 2 years, and then probably off and on my last 2 years of at school, and learned all about projection, learned all about audio. All this is analog times at that point, but that was how I started. So I didn't realize that I could have a career in audiovisual before that. I didn't realize I could get paid to do it before that. So that was a realization. And when I graduated from college, the theater jobs that I was looking at, they didn't pan out. But audiovisual jobs in hotels, they were pretty easy to get. So that's where I started in a hotel at the Renaissance Chicago, the Stouffer Renaissance Chicago, working for PSAV. That was my first job.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who did not go to the stagecraft classes, explain to people what exactly a flat is and why it's important.
Oh, sure. That's your backdrops. That used to be your backdrops before
Yeah.
all the projection and LED walls and all that. It was hard flats. We built these, the background set, wood frame and muslin on top of it with the horse glue. And that glue, the smell of that glue when you walk into the theater, I mean, there's nothing like it. The smell of glue and sawdust in a theater back in those times. And paint the flat, and that was your set. That was one of your background.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I will agree with you because I graduated around the same time as well, and
Hmm.
it was involved in many muslin painting
Yeah.
sessions. So yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Good times.
So you mentioned Chicago. You are from the Chicago area, Gary, Indiana.
Hmm.
You've lived in DC for a number of years now.
Hmm.
Um, you would take this question either from the Chicago area or the DC area or both.
Hmm.
But there are certainly obstacles being a Black individual in the AV industry and being a Black woman in the industry.
Hmm.
What obstacles did you experience, and how did you overcome those?
Hmm. Well, I would say I've been seeing a lot about our new Vice President Kamala Harris being the first woman VP, the first woman of color as a VP. She's a lot of first, and one of the things that she says a lot is, "I may be the first, but I won't be the last." Right.
Yeah,
So I have had a long career of first. Um, so whether it was being the only woman on the crew, certainly always the only Black woman. I mean, that's just how it's always been for me. Being the only woman on the crew back in 95, 96, 97, 98, um, working in Chicago, then moving to DC in 98. So being the only woman, being the only Black woman um, on the crew has been probably, it has felt, it's been isolating, it's been lonely because there wasn't anybody else, you know, birds of a feather flock together. There wasn't another woman that I could go to and say, hey, well, how did you handle this? Or how did you feel about this? Or there were very few women at that time. Um, so that's coming from the perspective of being in Chicago and being here in DC, certainly. Working for companies like PSAV, Swank at the time. I worked for Swank in Nashville. After September 11th, I moved from here to Nashville. So working in Nashville certainly felt the same way. Um, so those are challenges. You may not think it's a big deal, but that's only because if you walk into a room with your peers and all your peers look like you just that's never been an experience for me. Even to this day, um, I go to AVEC, for instance, and in the room of how many 300, 400 people, there was maybe 4 or 5 Black people in the whole room.
yeah.
So you seek those folks out and you get to know each other and you prop each other up and you find out ways to figure out ways to call them and, hey, what are you doing about this, and how are you doing, and those types of things. You follow each other around, but it's a really small community. So I am a Black woman, but I'm an AV person, and that's kind of how I've always looked at handling that kind of thing. Just it's never been about race or being a woman. As far as I was concerned, it's been a concern for other people, but as far as I was concerned, it was never about that.
There's a book I was turned on to by a young man by the name of David Goggins. And if you're not familiar with David Goggins, David,
Mhm.
phenomenal soldier. He was one
Okay.
of the very few people that has been a Navy SEAL as well as an Army Ranger. And he talks a lot about being the only, being the
Mhm.
first.
Mhm.
He is a black man. Grew up in southern Indiana, not around Chicago, but in the rural part of Indiana, and some of that is also
It's
goes back to
tough.
only. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the fact that sometimes a lot of times you were the only that position, and going back to the vice president, um, has to give you a certain perspective of helping others, though,
Mhm.
of making sure that you aren't the last. Talk about
Absolutely.
that and talk about your experience mentoring others coming up behind you.
Absolutely. I think that is part of the reason that I have a really big place in my heart for workforce development in our industry, because I really believe in pulling up somebody else with you, whoever that is, if it's young people, if it's students, if it's people of color, whoever it is. And I don't want to, um, this is 25 plus years into the industry. I don't want to look at the next 15 years of working and say, dang, I'm still the only. Then that means I didn't do my job. That means that I didn't talk to enough people or tell people about my career and my industry and encourage them to just know about our industry and to consider it as an option for them. So I see a lot more women in audiovisual, in live events, in integration. And I'm really happy and proud about that. And I don't know how much that had to do with them seeing me somewhere or being encouraged by me, but the few of us that were the onlys, I think that it had to do with us all collectively being able to make a difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that in talking and kind of prepping for this segment is um, looking at some of the obstacles and human beings in general. We have a choice when we're faced with different challenges.
Hmm.
You can choose to overcome it, or you can choose to go a different route. You and I come from different backgrounds, and I've said this before. I know my limitations when it comes to talking about issues of diversity. I am a white straight man. That is what I am, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so my challenges have been different. When you face some of those challenges,
Hmm.
why did you choose to stick it out and say, you know what, this is AV, this is what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I'm going to, tackle these things and overcome these, as opposed to, what, saying I'm going to go a different route.
Yeah. Well, there where do you go? I guess is the question. Where do you go where some of the challenges that you have as a person of color, as a woman in this industry, where you wouldn't find them? There really isn't anywhere that you can go. So as far as overcoming obstacles, I think that I've done my share of education to people, to people who are open-minded and who wanted to listen. I've had a lot of really good friends that I worked with in my different opportunities, different jobs that I've had here in DC area, in Nashville, in Chicago, where, I've got this, you know, white guy who's my best friend. We go to lunch every day and he gets to know me. And maybe some of the things that he didn't know about Black people were basically the fact that we're no different from him. So, I mean, I've had that experience everywhere I've gone where I have my work friends and we're just friends, and that is how I've always wanted it. And something might come up and we chop it up, or we just try to have an understanding. And I, I felt I have so many work friends who I consider family because of that. So I think I was thinking about this, and I think that there's a couple different words that come to mind for me. One is empathy, and one is perception.
Okay.
So I think that our country, our world could use a lot more empathy. I know when I in my younger self, there maybe have been something that I just didn't understand, or I just couldn't forgive, and I just walked away, or I just, okay, I'm done with this. Um, as I've gotten older, I, especially this past year, I didn't realize how empathetic I was on a lot of different scenarios. It doesn't have to happen to me for me to understand how that might feel. And I think that if more people have empathy, then you can understand how you may not have experienced that, but you can understand how somebody might feel if that situation happens to them. Um, and then with perception, I've in trying to overcome where I might have felt a slight because I was a Black woman, and trying to explain that situation to whoever it is that I'm talking with, that was my perception of what happened. It's so funny how many times you're told that's not what happened. They couldn't have been thinking about it that way. And it's like, well, that was that was my perception. So why is your perception of it more valid than my perception? And so that happens. It's hard enough to even speak your mind when you feel like something happened, and it's subtle, and you can't quite put your finger on it. Is it because of this? Is it because of that? So it's hard enough to even say it out loud, to voice it. But then when you're told, no, I'm sure that's not what happened. I'm sure that's you did the dog whistle that you think you heard is not what it was. I'm sure that's not what it is. You know, it just makes you feel some kind of way. So I think that empathy and perception have been my two words that I've been thinking a lot about. And in trying to overcome any issues that I've ever had, I've tried to get the person to understand where I was coming from, and to understand how what may have transpired could be my perception, and that my perception is just as valid as theirs.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a another theory that you know what the your truth and my truth aren't absolute. It is somewhere in the middle, because we each have our own view of what happened, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of what the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, last kind of question here before I let you go is when you look back at when you retire from AV, and just for the record, it's a long time, because
Yeah.
this is not that old. Um, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want your biggest contribution to this industry to be?
Oh my gosh. Last night when I heard about Cicely Tyson passing away, I was distraught. And that was such a, I mean, she's just such an icon. She's somebody you grow up, admiring. And Gail King asked her that question, and she said, I just want people to know that I've done my best. And I was just, I just teary, and I just couldn't believe. I mean, what else can you say?
Yeah.
So I won't say exactly what she said, but that's how I feel. I would like to think that I'm a better person now today than I was, years ago. That I'm a better professional now than I was years ago, and I only hope that I can continue to grow and continue to be better, and continue to send the elevator back down for younger people to be able to enjoy a career in this great profession we have. I just wish more people knew about us, and so that they can have the same opportunities.
All right, very good. That'll be a good place to stop it. Alexis La Broi, thank you so much. How do people get a hold of you or PRG Gear?
Sure. You can reach me at on Twitter and LinkedIn, Alexis La Broi, and PRG Gear is prggear.com.
All right, thanks, Alexis. For us, for AVNation, go by our website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others, including our 2 weekly programs. One's called AV Week, looks at the commercial side of the AV industry, and the other is Resi Week, looks at the residential side. All that and more at avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv.